At its most basic level, a famine is an extreme deprivation of food. That's how everybody understands it. But there's also a technical definition, which is used by aid agencies, the UN, governments around the world, and they use it to determine whether or not a given population is suffering from famine, the most extreme kind of catastrophe. There's an organization called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, and they have a scale, and the most extreme level on that scale is famine, and they use that when a situation gets and ticks all the boxes in that classification. That's when they technically declare a famine. And over the past decade, they've only declared famine twice, once in Somalia and then in South Sudan. Several factors need to be met at the same time for it to be a famine. According to its scale, the designation involves 20% of a given population must be suffering from extreme food shortages. 30% of children must be experiencing acute malnutrition. And in terms of death rates, 2 people or 4 children out of every 100,000 dying of hunger. And when those conditions are met, they declare a famine. So the reason we're talking about this now and looking at the definition of famine is because there's a crisis unfolding as we speak in Somalia. This is also a country, Somalia, that's being affected by the war in Ukraine. Before the war in Ukraine, Ukraine supplied about 90% of Somalia's wheat. And so it's been affected by that. And this combination of factors has led to a hunger catastrophe. The agency responsible for deciding whether or not it is technically a famine, they said that no, that things are really, really bad and that Somalia is on the cusp of a famine, but technically it's not a famine right now, and that's why we're talking about it. Many people who've been arguing, for instance, that in Somalia it should be declared, one of the things that they say is that if you call it a famine, you will ring this alarm bell, that'll focus more attention on this catastrophe, and that in turn will unlock aid. When famine was declared for the last time in Somalia, it led to an uptick in the funds that were diverted to help people there. As far as the IPC is concerned, even though it's an emotive word, they say that, look, at the end of the day, we're doing a scientific assessment. We're not in the business of, the emotive power of this word. And they say that we're not there yet. The causes are various. In Somalia's case, for instance, there's civil conflict, there's a drought, which people say has been worsened by climate change. So all of these factors come together. And of course, right now, in the backdrop, we also have the war in Ukraine, which has affected food security around the world. It's also affected the price of food. We've seen food inflation around the world. When the IPC held back from declaring a famine, said that things were really, really bad, but not quite there. One of the things that they highlighted was that the reason they were not declaring a famine is that even though Somalia is right at the threshold, what has so far stopped it from crossing that threshold is the work that's been done on the ground. So what needs to happen, at least in the short term, with communities that are particularly badly affected, is help on the ground for communities that are struggling. What needs to happen in the longer term is, of course, to make the food supply chain better, to give people more access to food, to do things that will bring down the price of grain, and to fight climate change. That's a big, big factor. It affects what people can plant. It affects what people can harvest. So the longer term picture is of course more complicated, requires concerted action. The short term picture is just rolling up your sleeves and bringing as much support as possible to the communities most in need.